and then there's like I don't know how much seconds. Oh, we're at 3 warps. We only have like I don't know how many seconds before the yeah. High Stream Labs, also known as Hello Myself. Anyways, come on. Can we get at least one person in here? Can we get at least one person in here on my analytics? Because oh, that's just chat rating critique. Oh, hello everybody, also known as Nobody. Welcome to my stream, where the Minecraft series actually never existed, and that I actually won the 6 Penguin Jams, the IO Game Jam hosted by previously by Scammer and Not House that now left PenguinMod, and also the other stuff like yeah the first ever Penguin Jam, like the one where the theme was one shot. The second act Penguin Jam was the first actual Penguin Jam where there was actually badges this time, and I actually got first place, and I even got first place on the 3 following with a giant score of 10 out of 10. And there's nothing you can do to prove otherwise. Anyways, let's read 1984 in my greatness. Just kidding. Hi, welcome to my 1984 stream. Let's actually just read this because this entire intro was just me trying to get into the chapter 4. I may have watched a summary before reading the actual chapter. Let us begin now with the deep, unconscious sigh with not even the nearness of the telescreen could prevent him from uttering when his day's work started. Winston pulled the speak right towards him, blew the dust from its mouthpiece, and put on his spectacles. Then he unrolled and clipped together 4 small cylinders of paper which had already flopped out of the pneumatic tube on the right-hand side of his desk. In the walls of the cubicle there were 3 orifices. What are that? Orifices. A body orifice is any opening in the body of an animal. Translation? No. Okay. To the right of the speak right. Hang on, what is speak right again? Anyways, a small pneumatic tube for written messages. To the left, a larger one for newspapers, and in the side wall, within easy reach of Winston's arm, a large oblong slit protected by a wire grating. This last was for the disposal of waste paper. Similar slits existed in thou- thousands or tens of thousands throughout the building, not only in every room, but at short intervals in every corridor. For some reason, they were nicknamed memory holes. We finally have someone. When one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in, whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air. Hang on. Whereupon would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces which were hidden somewhere in the recesses of the building. Winston examined the 4 slips of paper which he had unrolled. Each contained a message of only 1 or 2 lines in the abbreviated jargon, not actually newspeak, but consisting largely of newspeak words, which was used in the ministry for internal purposes. They ran Times 17.3.84 BB speech mal-reported Africa rectified times 19.12.83 forecasts 3 YP fourth quarter 83 mythprints verify current issue times 14.2.84 mini plenty mal-quoted chocolate rectify times 3.12.83 reporting BB day order double plunks wood plus on good refs on persons rewrite full wise up sub and ante filing. With a faint feeling of satisfaction, Winston laid the fourth message aside. It was an intricate and responsible job, and had better be dealt with last. The other three were routine matters. Through the second one would probably mean some tedious wading through lists of figures. Winston dialed back numbers on the telescreen and called for the appropriate issues of The Times, which slid out of the pneumatic tube after only a few minutes' delay. Hang on. The messages he had received referred to articles or news items which for one reason or another it was thought necessary to alter or as the official phrase had it to rectify. For example, it appeared from the Times of the 17th of March that Big Brother, in his speech of the previous day, had predicted that the South Indian front would remain quiet, but that a Eurasian offensive would shortly be launched in North Africa. As it happened, the Eurasian High Commander had, Bart, had launched its offensive in South India and left North Africa alone. It was therefore necessary to rewrite a paragraph of Big Brother's speech in such a way as to make him predict the thing that had actually happened. Or again, the Times of the 19th of December had published the official forecasts of the outpost of of consumption goods in the fourth quarter of 1983, which was also the sixth quarter of the ninth three-year plan. Today's issue contained a statement of the actual output, from which it appeared that their forecasts were in every instance grossly wrong. Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the later ones. As for the third message, it referred to a very simple error which could be set right in a couple of minutes. As short as time ago as February, the Ministry of Plenty had issued a promise, a categorical pledge were the official words, that there would be no reduction of the chocolate ration during 1984. Actually, as Winston was aware, the chocolate ration was to be reduced from 30 grams to 20 at the end of the present week. All that was needed was to substitute from the original promise a warning that it would probably be necessary to reduce the ration at some time in April. As soon as Winston had dealt with each of the messages, he clipped his speak-written corrections to the appropriate copy of The Times and pushed them into the pneumatic tube. Then, with a movement which was as nearly as possible unconscious, he crumpled up the original message and any notes that he himself had made, and dropped them into the memory hole to be devoured by the flames. What happened in the unseen labyrinth to which the pneumatic tubes led, he did not know in detail, but he did know in general terms. As soon as all the corrections which happened to be necessary in any particular number of the times had been assembled and collated, that number would be reprinted, the original copy destroyed, and the corrected copy placed on the files in its stead. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct. nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palim palimpsest. What palim palimpsest? What does that mean? Definition from Merriam-Webster. A very old document on which the original writing had been erased and replaced with new writing. Scraped clean and re-inscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one on which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of the books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the times which might, because of changes in political agreement or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, have been rewritten a dozen times, still stood on the files bearing its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and rewritten again and again, and were invariably reissued without any admission that any alteration had been made. Even the written instructions which Winston received, and which he invariably got rid of as soon as he had dealt with them, never stated or implied that an act of forgery was to be committed. Always the reference was to slips, errors, misprints or misquotations, which it was necessary to put right in the interests of accuracy. But actually he thought as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures it was not even forgery. It was merely beep beep. God damn it. Sorry. Boop 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 boop. Can I be? Okay, sorry. I'm back now. I'm I should be back now. Of nonsense from another. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world. What is connection? Connection? A variant spelling of connection. With anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. Statistics were just as much a fantasy in their original version as in their rectified version. A great deal of the time you were expected to make them up out of your head. For example, the Ministry of Plenty's forecast had estimated the output of boots for the quarter at 145 million pairs. The actual output was given as 62 millions. Winston, however, in rewriting the forecast, marked the figure down to 57 millions, so as to allow for the usual claim that the quota had been overfulfilled. In any case, 62 millions was no nearer the truth than 57 millions, or than 145 millions. Very likely no boots had been produced at all. Likely, likelier still, nobody knew how many had been produced, much less cared. All one knew that was that every quarter astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot, and so it was with every class of recorded fact, great or small. Everything faded away into a shadow world in which, finally, even the date of the year had become uncertain. Winston glanced across the hall. In the corresponding cubicle on the other side, a small, precise-looking, dark-chinned man named Tillotson was working steadily away, with a folded newspaper on his knee and his mouse very close to the mouthpiece of the speakwrite. He had the air of trying to keep what he was saying a secret between himself and the telescreen. He looked up and his spectacles darted a hostile flash in Winston's direction. Winston hardly knew Tillotson and had no idea what work he was employed on. People in the records department did not readily talk about their jobs. In the long, windowless hall, with its double row of cubicles and its endless rustle of papers and hum of voices murmuring into speakwrites, there were quite a dozen people whom Winston did not even know by name, though he daily saw them hurrying to and fro in the corridors of gesticulating in the 2 minutes 8. He knew that in the cubicle next to him, the little woman with sandy hair toiled day in day out, simply at tracking down and deleting from the press the names of people who had been vaporized and were therefore considered never to have existed. There was a certain fitness in this, since her own husband had been vaporized a couple of years earlier, and a few cubicles away a mild, ineffectual, dreamy creature named Ampleforth, with very hairy ears and a surprising talent for juggling with rhymes and meters, was engaged in producing garbled versions, definitive texts they were called, of poems which had become ideologically offensive, but which for one reason or another were to be retained in the anthologies. And this hall, with its 50 workers or thereabouts, was only one subsection, a single cell, as it were, in the huge complexity of the records department. Beyond, above, below were other swarms of workers engaged in an unimaginable multitude of jobs. There were the huge printing shops with their sub-editors, their typography experts, and their elaborately equipped studios for the faking of photographs. There was the teleprogrammer sections, with its engineers, its producers, and its teams of actors specially chosen for their skill in imitating voices. There were the armies of references clerks whose job was simply to draw up lists of books and periodicals which were due for recall. There was the vast repositories where the corrected documents were stored, and the hidden furnaces where the original copies were destroyed, and somewhere or another, quite anonymous, there were the directing brains who coordinated whole effort and laid down the lines of the policy, who made it necessary that the fragment of the past should be preserved, that one falsified and rubbed out of existence. And the records department, after all, was itself. Hang on, come on. And the records department, after all, was itself only a single branch of the Ministry of Truth, whose primary job was not to reconstruct the past, but to supply the citizens of Oceania with newspapers, films, textbooks, telescreen programs, plays, novels, with every conceivable kind of information, instruction, or entertainment, from a statue to a slogan, from a lyric poem to a biological treatise, and from a child's spelling book to a newspeak dictionary. And the ministry had not only to supply the multifarious needs of the party, but also to repeat the whole operation at a lower level for the benefit of the proletariat. There was a whole chain of separate departments dealing with proletarian literature, music, drama, and entertainment generally. Here were produced rubbishy newspapers containing almost nothing except sport, crime, and astrology, sensational five-set novelettes, films oozing with bleep, and sentimental songs which were composed entirely by mechanical means on a special kind of kaleidoscope known as versificator. Oh, what is a versificator? A versificator. Come on, come on. Versificator. One who creates verse. Versificator in 1984, a machine in the novel 1984. Thanks, Kindle. Thanks for giving me the actual thing I wanted to know. But it says but the first thing I see is one who creates verse in poetry. Or Bertsolleritza, the art of singing extemporaneously composed songs in Basque. See also, never mind. There was even a whole subsection in pornosec, it was called in Newspeak, engaged in producing the lowest kind of yeah, the best censor. Anyways, which was sent out in sealed packets and which no party member other than those who worked on it was permitted to look at. 3 messages had slid out of the pneumatic tube while Winston was working, but they were simple matters, and he had disposed of them before the 2 minutes hate interrupted him. When the hate was over, he returned to his cubicle, took the Newspeak dictionary from the shelf, pushed the speak right to one side, cleaned his he cleaned his spectacles, and settled down to his main job of the morning. Winston's greatest pleasure in life was his work. Most of it was a tedious routine, but included in it there were also jobs so difficult and intricate that you could lose yourself in them as in the depth of a mathematical problem, delicate pieces of forgery in which you had nothing to guide you except your knowledge of the pri principles of inksock and your estimate of what the party wanted you to say. Uh, The political I had to refer to inksock again. Political ideology of the totalitarian government of Oceania in George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, of course, and your estimate of what the party wanted you to say. Winston was good at this kind of thing. On occasion he had even been entrusted with the rectifications of the Times' leading articles, which were written entirely in newspeak. He unrolled the message that he had set aside earlier. It ran, Times 3.12.83 reporting BB Day order double plus on good refs unpersons rewrite full wise upsub anti-filing in old speak or standard English. This might be rendered the reporting of Big Brother's order for the day in the Times of December 3rd, 1983 is extremely unsatisfactory and makes references to non-existent persons. Rewrite it in full and submit your draft to a higher authority before filing. Winston read through the offending article. Big Brother's order for the day, it seemed, had been chiefly devoted to praising the work of an organization known as FFCC. What's that? FFCC may refer to Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Florida Film, Critics Circle, Flowery Field, Cricket Club, Full Faith, and Credit Clause, Florida Federation of Color Guard Circuit. Yeah, which supplied cigarettes this time, and other comforts to the sailors in the floating fortress. A certain Comrade Withers, a prominent member of the inner party, had been singled out for special mention and awarded the decoration, the Order of Conspicuous Merit, Second Class. 3 months later, FFCC had suddenly been dissolved with no reasons given. One could assume that Withers and his associates were now in disgrace, but there had been no report of the matter in the press or on the telescreen. That was to be expected, since it was unusual for political offenders to be put on trial or even publicly denounced. The great purges involving thousands of people with public trials of traitors and thought criminals who made a abject confession of their crimes and were afterwards executed were special showpieces not occurring oftener than once in a couple of years. More commonly, people who had incurred the displeasure of the party simply disappeared and were never heard of again. One never had the smallest clue as to what had happened to them. In some cases, they might yet not even be dead. Perhaps 30 people personally known to Winston, not counting his parents, had disappeared at one time or another. Winston stroked his nose gently with a paper clip. In the cubicle across the way, Comrade Tillotson was still crouching secretively over his speakwrite. He raised his head for a moment, again the hostile spectacle flash. Winston wondered whether Comrade Tillotson was engaged on the same job as himself. It was perfectly possible. So tricky a piece of work would never be entrusted to a single person. On the other hand, to turn it over to a committee would be to admit openly that an act of fabrication was taking place. Very likely as many as dozen people were now working away on rival versions of what Big Brother had actually said, and presently some master brain in their party would select this version or that, would re-edit and set in motion the complex processes of cross-referencing that would be required. And then the chosen lie would pass into the permanent records and become truth. Winston did not know why Withers has been disgraced. Perhaps it was for corruption or incompetence. Perhaps Big Brother was merely getting rid of a too popular subordinate. Perhaps Withers or someone close to him had been suspected of heretical tendencies, or perhaps what likeliest of all, the thing that had simply happened because and vaporizations were a necessary part of the mechanics of government. The only real clue lay in the words "refs on persons," which indicated that Withers was already dead. You could not invariably assume this to be the case. When people were arrested, sometimes they were released and allowed to remain at liberty for as much as a year or 2 years before being executed. Very occasionally, some person whom you had believed dead long since would make a ghostly reappearance at some public trial where he would implicate hundreds of others by his testimony before vanishing, this time forever. Withers, however, was already an unperson. He did not exist, he had never existed. Winston decided that it would not be enough to simply reverse the tendency of Big Brother's speech. It was better to make it deal with something totally unconnected with its original subject. He might turn the speech into the usual denunciation of traitors and thought criminals, but that was a little too obvious. While to invent a victory at the front, or some triumph or overproduction, in the ninth 3-year plan, might complicate the record too much, what was needed was a piece of pure fantasy. Suddenly there sprang into his mind, ready-made as it were, the image of a certain Comrade Ogilvy, who had recently died in a battle, in heroic circumstances. There were occasions when Big Brother devoted his order for the day to commemorate some humble rank. Hang on a sec. Before I actually continue reading, my settings are currently off. Layout, no, more. I want to know how much time is left in the chapter. Yeah, we're good. Brother devoted to his order for the day to commemorate some humble, rank-and-file party member whose life and death he held up as an example worthy to be followed. Today he should commemorate Comrade Ogilvy. It was true that there was no such person as Comrade Ogilvy, but a few lines of print and a couple of faked photographs would soon bring him into existence. Winston thought for a moment, then pulled the speaker towards him, and began dictating in Big Brother's familiar style, a style at once military and pedantic, and because of a trick of asking questions and then promptly answering them. What lessons do we learn from this fact, comrades? The lesson which is also one of the fundamental principles of Inkshot, that, etc., etc. Easy to imitate. At the age of 3, Comrade Ogilvy had refused all toys except a drum, a submachine gun, and a model helicopter. At 6 a year early, a special relaxation of the rules, he had joined the spies. At 9, he had been a troop leader. At 11, he had denounced his uncle to the thought police after overhearing a conversation which appeared to him to have criminal tendencies. At 17, he had been a district organizer of the Junior Anti-Bleep League. At 19, he had designed a hand grenade which had been adopted by the Ministry of Peace. The Hang on, Ministry of Peace, what is that again? Ministry of Peace. Ministry of Peace in Minipax is one of four ministries in Gacha, along with the Ministry of Truth. The Ministry of Peace governs an Oceanic province. It serves as the Defense Ministry and is in charge of the armed forces. Alright, in which, at its first trial, had killed 31 Eurasian prisoners in one burst. At 23, he had perished in action, pursued by enemy jet planes while flying over the Indian Ocean with important dispatches. He had weighted his body with his machine gun and leapt out of the helicopter into deep water. Dispatches, and all an end, said Big Brother, which was it was impossible to contemplate without feelings of envy. Big Brother added a few remarks on the purity and single-mindedness of Comrade Ogilvy's life. He was a total abstainer and a non-smoker. Non-smoker, had no recreation except a daily hour in the gymnasium, and had taken a vow of celibacy, believing marriage and the care of a family to be incompatible with a 24-hour-a-day devotion to duty. He had no subjects of conversation except the principles of Ingsoc, and no aim in life except the defeat of the Eurasian enemy and the hunting down of spies, saboteurs, thought criminals, and traitors generally. Winston debated with himself whether to award Comrade Ogilvy in order of conspicuous merit. In the end, he had decided against it because of the unnecessary cross-referencing that it would entail. Once again, he glanced at his rival in the opposite cubicle. Something seemed to tell him with certainty that Tillotson was busy on the same job as himself. There was no way of knowing whose job would finally be adopted, but he felt a profound conviction that it would be his own. Comrade Ogilvy, unimagined an hour ago, was now a fact. It struck him as curious that you could create a dead man but not a living one. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past, and when once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as then authentically, and upon the same evidence, as Charlemagne of Julius Caesar. Now it's time for the break time. Thanks for the farts. And we are back to more 1984. This time, Chapter 5. Now, let us continue. We have like, I don't know how. Oh, it's 35 minutes. You know what? How do I speed things up? I'll decrease text size to try. Layout. No, font. It's lagging, it's lagging, it's lagging. Hang on. Do I need to extend this break time? I have to restart my Kindle. Amazing! Amazing, just give me a 1 minute break. 1 minute break! I'm very sorry! Getting this over real quick. Please don't take a long time. Please don't take a long time. Kindle! It's on. Loading. It'll be extended. Hang on. Very, very sorry for this today. It's just I tried to decreasing the font size, and then Kindle just crashed. The bar's almost complete. Hang on. Whoosh. 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 Come on, Kindle. You can load. It loaded. Yay. Hang on while it opens. I'm closing the door again. I want to read 1984. Hmm. Now, I want... This should end the break. And now... No, not font. No, font. Not font. Not font. Not. I want to know where is chapter 5. Where is chapter 5? Chapter 5? Chapter 5. Chapter 5. There! Now we can actually read. In the low-ceilinged canteen, deep underground, the lunch crew jerked slowly forward. The room was already very full and deafeningly noisy. From the metal frame at the counter, the steam of stew came pouring forth, with a sour metallic smell which did not quite overcome the fumes of Victory Gin. On the far side of the room there was a small bar, a mere hole in the wall, where gin could be bought at 10 cents the large nip. "Just the man I was looking for," said a voice at Winston's back. He turned round. It was his friend Syme, who worked in the research department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. You did not have friends nowadays. You had comrades. But there were some comrades whose whose society was pleasanter than that of others. Syme was a philologist, a kind of scholar, a specialist in newspeak. Indeed, he was one of enormous enormous team of experts now engaged in compiling the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. He was a tiny creature, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large protuberant eyes curving outward, and once mournful and derisive, which seemed to search your face closely while he was speaking to you. "I want to ask whether you got any razor blades," he said. "Not one," said Winston with a sort of guilty haste. "I've tried all over the place. They don't exist any longer. If everyone kept asking you for razor blades. Actually, he had two unused ones which he was hoarding up. There had been a famine of them for months past. At any given moment there was some necessary article which the party shops were unable to supply. Sometimes it was buttons, sometimes it was darning wool, sometimes it was shoelaces. At present it was razor blades. You could only get hold of them, if at all, by scrounging more or less furtively on the free market. I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks, he added untruthfully. The crew gave another jerk forward. As they halted and he turned and faced Syme again, each of them took a greasy metal tray from a pile at the end of the counter. "Did you go and see the prisoners hanged yesterday?" said Syme. "I was working," said Winston indifferently. "I shall see it on the flicks, I suppose." "A very inadequate substitute," said Syme. His mocking eyes roved over Winston's face. "I know you," the eyes seemed to say. "I I see through you. I know very well why you didn't go to see those prisoners hanged." In an intellectual way, Syme was venomously orthodox. He would talk with a disagreeable, gloating satisfaction of a helicopter race on enemy villages, and trials and confessions of thought criminals, the executions in the cellars of Ministry of Love. Talking to him was largely a matter of getting him away from such subjects, and entangling him, if possible, in the technicalities of newspeak, on which he was authoritative and interesting. Winston turned his head a little aside to avoid the scrutiny of the large dark eyes. "It was a good hanging," said Syme reminiscently. "I think it spoils it when they tie their feet together. I like to see them kicking. And above all, at the end, their tongues sticking right out, and blue, a quite bright blue. That's the detail that appeals to me." "Next, please!" yelled the white apron prole with the ladle. Winston and Syme pushed their trays beneath the grill. Onto each was dumped swiftly the regulation lunch, a metal pannikin of pinkish gray stew, a hunk of bread, a cube of cheese, a mug of milkless Victory coffee, and one saccharine tablet. "There's a table over there." "Under that telescreen," said Syme. "Let's pick up a gin on the way." The gin was served out to them in handleless china mugs. They threaded their way across the crowded room and unpacked their trays onto the metal-topped table, on one corner of which someone had left a pool of stew, a filthy liquid mess that had the appearance of vomit. Winston took up his mug of gin, paused for an instant to collect his nerve, and gulped the oily tasting stuff down. When he had winked the tears out of his eyes, he suddenly discovered that he was hungry. He began swallowing spoonfuls of the stew, which, in among its general sloppiness, had had cubes of spongy pinkish stuff, which was probably a preparation of meat. Neither of them spoke again till they had emptied their pannikins. From the table at Winston's left, a little behind his back, someone was talking rapidly and continuously, a harsh gabble almost like the quacking of a duck, which pierced the general uproar of the room. "How's the dictionary getting on?" said Winston, raising his voice to overcome the noise. "Slowly," said Syme. "I'm on the adjectives. It's fascinating." He had brightened up immediately at the mention of Newspeak. He put his pannikin aside, took up his hunk of bread in one delicate hand and his cheese in the other, and hang on, and leaned across the table so as to be able to speak without shouting. "The 11th edition is the definitive edition," he said. "We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. When we finished it, we people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them, every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete the year 2050. He bit hungrily into his bread and swallowed a couple of mouthfuls, then continued speaking with a sort of pedant's passion. His thin, dark face had become animated. His eyes had lost their mocking expression and grown almost dreamy. "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and adjective. But there are hundreds of nouns that can be got rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms, there are also the antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well better, because it's an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid, and all the rest of them? Plus good governs the meaning, or double plus good if you want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there will be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words in reality. Only one word. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? It was Big Brother's idea originally, of course. He added as an afterthought. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention of Big Brother. Nevertheless, Syme immediately detected a certain lack of enthusiasm. "You haven't a real appreciation of Newspeak, Winston," he said almost sadly. "Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. I've read some of those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. In your heart, you'd prefer stick to old speak, with all its vagueness and its useless, go, shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty of the destruction of words. Do you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year?" Winston did know that, of course. He smiled sympathetically, he hoped, not trusting himself to speak. Syme bit off another fragment of the dark-colored bread, chewed it briefly, and went on. "Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point. But the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse from committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need even for that. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak is Inksuck, and Inksuck is Newspeak, he added with a sort of mystical satisfaction. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive to who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? Except, began Winston doubtfully, and he stopped. It had been on the tip of his tongue to say, except the proles, but he checked himself, not feeling fully certain that this remark was in some way unorthodox. Slime, however, had divined what he was about to say. The proles are not human beings, he had said carelessly. By 2050, earlier, probably all real knowledge of Old-speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Bryon, they'll all exist only in Newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually changed into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery, where the concept of freedom had been abolished? The whole climate of this thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought, as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. One of these days, thought Winston, with sudden deep conviction, Syme will be vaporized. He is too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. One day he will disappear. It is written in his face. Winston had finished his bread and cheese. He turned a little sideways in his chair to drink his mug of coffee. At the table on his left, the man with the strident voice was still talking remorselessly away. A young woman who was perhaps his secretary, and who was sitting with her back to Winston, was listening to him and seemed to be eagerly agreeing with everything that he said. From time to time, Winston caught some such remark as, "I think you're so right, I do so agree with you," uttered in a youthful and rather silly feminine voice. But the other voice never stopped for an instant, even when the girl was speaking. Winston knew the man by sight, though he knew no more about him that he had held for some important post in the fiction department. He was a man of about 30, with a muscular throat and a large mobile mouth. His head was a thrown. Hang on. His head was a He was a man about 30 with a muscular throat and a large mobile mouth. His head was thrown back a little, and because of the angle at which he was sitting, his spectacles caught the light and presented to Winston two blank discs instead of eyes. What was slightly horrible was that from the stream of sound that poured out of his mouth was almost impossible to distinguish a single word. Just once Winston caught a phrase. Complete and final elimination of, sorry, uh, of typecast solid. For the rest, it was just the noise, a quacking, and yet, though you could not actually hear what the man was saying, you could not be in any doubt about its general nature. He might be denouncing Goldstein and demanding sterner measures against thought criminals and saboteurs. He might be foaming against the atrocities of the Eurasian army. He might be praising Big Brother or the heroes of Malabar. Front, it made no difference. Whatever it was, you could be certain that every word of it was pure orthodoxy, pure inksuck. As he watched the eyeless face with the jaw moving rapidly up and down, Winston had a curious feeling that this was not a real human being, but some kind of dummy. It was not the man's brain that was speaking. It was his larynx. The stuff that was coming out of him consisted of words, but it was not speech in the true sense. It was a noise uttered in unconsciousness, like the quacking of a duck. Syme had fallen silent for a moment, and with the handle of his spoon was tracing patterns in the puddle of stew. The voice from the other table quacked rapidly on, easily audible in spite of the surrounding din. "There is a word in Newspeak," said Syme. "I don't know whether you know it. Duck speak. To quack like a duck. It is one of those interesting words that has two contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it is abuse. Applied to someone you agree with, it is praise. Unquestionably, Syme will be vaporized." Winston thought it again. He thought it with a kind of sadness, although well knowing that Syme despised him and slightly disliked him, and was fully capable of denouncing him as a thought criminal if he saw any reason for doing so. There was something subtly wrong with Syme. There was something that he lacked: discretion, aloofness, a sort of savaging stupidity. You could not say that he was unorthodox. He believed in the principle of Ingsoc. He venerated Big Brother. He rejoiced over victories. He hated heretics, not merely with sincerity, but with a sort of restless zeal, an up-to-dateness of information, which the ordinary party member did not approach. Yet a faint air of disreputability always clung to him. He said things that would have been better unsaid. He had read too many books. He frequented the Chestnut Tree Cafe, haunt of painters and musicians. There was no law, not even an unwritten law, against frequenting the Chestnut Tree Cafe. Yet the place was somehow ill-omened. The old, discredited leaders of the party had been used to gather there before they were finally purged. Goldstein himself, it was said, had sometimes been seen there, years and decades ago. Syme's fate was not difficult to foresee, and yet it was a fact that if Syme grasped, even for 3 seconds, the nature of his, Winston's, secret opinions, he would betray him instantly to the thought police. So would anybody else, for that matter, but Syme more than most. Zeal was not enough. Orthodoxy was unconsciousness. Syme looked up. "Here comes Parsons," he said. Feels like here comes. Feels like the Jets just took him, but something in the tone of his voice seemed to add, "That bloody fool!" Parsons, Winston's fellow tenant at Victory Mansions, was in fact threading his way across the room, a tubby, middle-sized man with fair hair and a frog-like face. At 35, he was already putting on rolls of fat at neck and waistline, but his movements were brisk and boyish. His whole appearance was that of a little boy grown large, so much so that although he was wearing the regulation overalls, it was almost impossible not to think of him as being dressed in the blue shorts, gray shirt, and red neckerchief of the spies. In visualizing him, one saw always a picture of dimpled knees and sleeves, rolled back from pudgy forearms. Parsons did, indeed, invariably revert to shorts when a community hike or any other physical activity gave him an excuse for doing so. He greeted them both with a cheery "Hulo, hulo, hulo, hulo," and sat down at the table, giving off an intense smell of sweat. But beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. His powers of sweating were extraordinary. At the community center, you could always tell when he had been playing table tennis by the dampness of the bat handle. Syme had produced a strip of paper on which there was a long column of words, and was studying it with an ink pencil between his fingers. "Look at him working away in the lunch hour," said Parsons, nudging Winston. "Keenness, eh? What's that you got there, old boy? Something a bit too brainy for me, I expect. Smith, old boy, I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's that sub you forgot to give me. That's a good reminder to subscribe to my channel. You forgot to give me a sub, so give me a sub. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the channel. Which sub is that? And Winston, KylomaskGamer's channel. Okay, I'll actually get to the story. Said Winston. Which sub is that? Said Winston, automatically feeling for money. About a quarter of one's salary had to be earned earmarked for voluntary subscriptions, which were so numerous that it was difficult to keep track of them. For Hate Week, you know, the House by House Fund. I'm treasurer for our block. We're making an all-out effort going to put on a tremendous show. I tell you, it won't be my fault if old Victory Mansions doesn't have the biggest outfit of flags in the whole street. $2 you promised me. Winston found it and handed over two creased and filthy notes, which Parsons entered in a small notebook, in the neat handwriting of the illiterate. By the way, old boy, he said, I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with his catapult yesterday. I gave him a good dressing down for it. In fact, I told him I'd take the catapult away if he does it again. I think he was a little upset at not going to the execution, said Winston. Ah, well, what I meant to say shows the right spirit, doesn't it? Mischievous little beggars they are, both of them. But talk about keenness! All they think about is the spies and the war, of course. Do you know what that little girl of mine did last Saturday when her troop was on the hike of Berkhamsted? Yes, Berkham, Berkhamsted. It's a market town in Hertford, England. The Berkhamsted way, she got two other girls to go with her, slipped up from the hike, and spent the whole afternoon following a strange man. They kept on his tail for 2 hours right through the woods, and then, when they got into Amersham, handed him over the patrols. What did they do that for? Said Winston, somewhat taken aback. Parsons went on triumphantly. My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. Might have been dropped by parachute, for instance. But here's the point, old boy. What do you think put her onto him in the first place? She spotted he was wearing a funny kind of shoes, said she'd never seen anyone wearing shoes like that before. So the chances were he was a foreigner. Pretty smart for a small child of 7, eh? What's happened to the man? Said Winston. Ah, that I couldn't say, of course. But I wouldn't be altogether surprised if Parsons made the motion of aiming a rifle and clicked his tongue for the explosion. Good, said Syme abstractedly, without looking up from his strip of paper. Of course we can't afford to take the chances, agreed Winston dutifully. What I meant to say, there is a war on, said Parsons. As though in confirmation of this, a trumpet call floated from the telescreen just above the heads. However, it was not the proclamation of a military victory this time, but merely an announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. Comrades! Cried an eager, useful voice. Attention, comrades! We have glorious news for you. We have won the battle for production. Returns now completed of the output of all classes of consumption goods show that the standard of living has risen by no less than 20% over the past year. All over Oceania this morning, there were irrepressible spontaneous demonstrations when workers marched out of factories and offices and paraded through the streets with banners voicing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new happy life with his leadership was bestowed upon us. Here are some of the completed figures. Foodstuffs the phrase "our new happy life" recurred several times. It had been a favorite of late with the Ministry of Plenty. Parsons, his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of gaping solemnity, a sort of edified boredom. He could not follow the figures, but he was aware that they were in some way a cause for satisfaction. He had lugged out a huge and filthy pipe, which was already half full of charred tobacco. With the tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was seldom possible to fill a pipe to the top. Winston was smoking a victory cigarette, which he held carefully horizontal. The new ration did not start till tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For the moment he had shut his ears to the remoter noises and was listening to the stuff that streamed out of the telescreen. It appeared that there had even been demonstrations to thank Big Brother for raising the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week, and only yesterday, he reflected, it had been enough that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it! Parsons swallowed it easily, with the stupidity of an animal. The eyeless creature at the other table swallowed it fanatically, passionately, with a furious desire to track down, denounce, and vaporize anyone who would suggest that last week the ration had been 30 grams. Slime, too, in some more complex way, involving doublethink. Slime swallowed it. Was he, then, alone in the possession of a memory? The fabulous statistics continued to pour out of the telescreen. As compared with last year, there was more food, more clothes, more houses, more furniture, more cooking pots, more fuel, more ships, more helicopters, more books, more babies, more of everything except disease, crime, and insanity. Year by year and minute by minute, everybody and everything was whizzing rapidly upward. As Syme had done earlier, Winston had taken up his spoon and was dabbling in the pale-colored gravy that dribbled across the table, drawing a long streak of it out into a pattern. He meditated resentfully on the physical texture of life. Had it always been like this? Had food always tasted like this? He looked around the canteen, a low-ceilinged, crowded room, its walls grimy from the contact of innumerable bodies, battered metal babies and chairs, placed so close together that you sat with elbows touching, bent spoons, dented trays, coarse with white mugs, all surfaces greasy, grime in every crack, and a sourish composite smell of bad gin and bad coffee, and metallic stew and dirty clothes. Always in your stomach and in your skin there was a sort of protest, a feeling that you had been cheated of something that you had the right to. It was true that he had no memories of anything greatly different. Any time that he could accurately remember, there had never been quite enough to eat. One had never had socks or underclothes that were not full of holes. Furniture had always been battered and rickety, rooms underheated, tube trains crowded, house falling to pieces. Bread, 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 bread dark colored, tea a rarity, coffee filthy tasting, cigarettes insufficient, nothing cheap and plentiful except synthetic gin. And though, of course, it grew worse as one's body aged, was it not a sign that this was not the natural order of things? If one's heart sickened at the discomfort and dirt and scarcity. Hey, sorry, my microphone disconnected again. Thanks for the fart. Thanks so much for the fart. It was the fart that destroyed my headphones. Sorry, not exactly destroyed, but you know what I mean. If I would not have my headphones, then I wouldn't be here. It is not a sign that this was not the natural order of things. If one's heart sickened at the discomfort and dirt and scarcity, the interminable winters, the stickiness of one's socks, the lifts that never worked, the cold water, the gritty soap, the cigarettes that came to pieces, the food with its strange evil tastes? Why should one feel it to be intolerable unless one had some kind of ancestral memory that things had once been different? He looked round the canteen again. Nearly everyone was ugly, and would still have been ugly, even if dressed otherwise than in the uniform blue overalls. On the far side of the room, sitting at a table alone, a small, curiously beetle-like man was drinking a cup of coffee, his little eyes darting suspicious glances from side to side. How easy it was, though, thought Winston, if you did not look about you, to believe that the physical type set up by the party as an ideal tall, muscular youth, and deep bosomed, what does, deep bosomed, come on, Wikipedia has no research. Translation? No. Dictionary. Deep bosomed itself? No words. Deep bosomed, no. There is no word, no definition for deep bosomed. I don't know what that means now. Must ideal. Tall, muscular youths and deep bosomed maidens, blonde-haired, vital, sunburnt, carefree as an even predominated. Actually, so far as he could judge, the majority of people in Airstrip 1 were small, dark, and ill-favored. It was curious how that beetle-like type proliferated in the ministries. Little dumpy men, growing stout very early in life with short legs, swift scuttling moments, and fat inscrutable faces with very small eyes. It was the type that seemed to flourish best under the dominion of the party. The announcement from the Ministry of Plenty ended on another trumpet call, and gave way to tinny music. Parsons, stirred to vague enthusiasm by the bombardment of figures, took his pipe out of his mouth. "The Ministry of Plenty's certainly done a good job this year," he said without a knowing shake of his head. "By the way, Smith, old boy, I suppose you haven't got any razor blades you can let me have?" "Not one," said Winston. "I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks myself." "Ah, well, just thought I'd ask you, old boy." "Sorry," said Winston. The quacking voice from the next table, temporarily silenced during the ministry's announcement, had started up again as loud as ever. For some reason, Winston suddenly found himself thinking of Miss Parsons, with her wispy hair and the dust in the creases of her face. Within 2 years those children would be denouncing her to the thought police. Miss Parsons would be vaporized. Syme would be vaporized. Winston would be vaporized. O'Brien was to be vaporized. Parsons, on the other hand, would never be vaporized. The eyeless creature with the quacking voice would never be vaporized. The little beetle-like men who scuttle so nimbly through the labyrinth corridor of ministries, they too would never be vaporized. And the girl with dark hair, the girl from the fiction department, she would never be vaporized earlier. Either. Not earlier, either. It would seem to him that he knew instinctively who would survive and who would perish. Though just what it was that made for survival, it was not easy to say. At this moment, he was dragged out of his reverie with a violent jerk. The girl at the next table had turned partly round and was looking at him. It was the girl with dark hair. She was looking at him in a sidelong way, but with curious intensity. The instant she caught his eye, looked away again. The sweat started out on Winston's backbone. A horrible pang of terror went through him. It was gone almost at once, but it left a sort of nagging uneasiness behind. Why was she watching him? Why did she keep following him about? Unfortunately, he could not remember whether she had already been at the table when he arrived, or had come there afterwards. But yesterday, at any rate during the 2 minutes hate, she had sat immediately behind him, when there was no apparent to do so. Quite likely her real object had been to listen to him and make sure whether he was shouting loudly enough. His earlier thought returned to him. Probably she was not actually a member of the Sopolis, but then it was precisely the amateur spy who was the greatest danger of all. He did not know how long she had been looking at him, but perhaps for as much as 5 minutes, and it was possible that his features had not been perfectly under control. It was terribly dangerous to let your thoughts wander when you were in any public place or within range of a telescreen.
the smallest thing could give you away. A nervous tick, an unconscious look of anxiety, a habit of muttering to yourself, anything that carried it with the suggestion of abnormality, of having something to hide. In any case, to wear an improper expression on your face, to look incredulous when a victory was announced, for example, was itself a punishable offense. There was even a word for it in newspeak. Base crime, it was called. The girl had turned her back on him again. Perhaps after all, she was not really following him about. Perhaps it was coincidence that she had sat close to him 2 days running. His cigarette had gone out, and he laid it carefully on the edge of the table. He would finish smoking it after work, if he could keep the tobacco in it. Quite likely the person at the next table was a spy of the thought police, and quite likely he would be in the cellars of the Ministry of Love within 3 days. But a cigarette and must not be wasted. Syme had folded up his strip of paper and stowed it in his pocket. Parsons had begun talking again. "Did I ever told you, old boy," he said, chuckling round the stem of his pipe, about about the time when those two nippers of mine set fire to the old market woman's skirt because they saw her wrapping up sausages in the posture of BB? Sneaked up behind her and set fire to it with a box of matches. Burned her quite badly, I believe. Little beggars, eh? But keen as mustard. That's a first-rate training they give them in the spies nowadays. Better than in my day even. What just think the latest thing they'd serve them out with? Ear trumpets for listening through keyholes. My little girl I brought one home the other night. Tried it out on our sitting room door, and reckoned she could hear twice as much as with her ear to the hole. Of course, it's only a toy, mind you. Still gives them the right idea, eh? At this moment the telescreen let out a piercing whistle. It was the signal to return to work. All three men sprang to their feet to join in the struggle round the lifts, and the remaining tobacco fell out of Winston's cigarette. And that concludes our reading of chapter 4 and 5. Next stream, guess what we will read? We will read chapters 7 and 6 in reverse order. You see what I did there? You see what I did there here? I avoided the evil. I avoided the evil word by saying 7 and 6 in reverse order. So I don't have to be swarmed by the damned Gen Alphas. But anyways, it was good. It was good. I'm very sorry for the additional inconsistencies, but yeah, I still hope you enjoyed the actual reading parts, the parts where I actually read the thing, and I'll see. Oh, do I have to explain the Gen Alpha thing? So now I'm Generation Z. The generation after mine is Generation Alpha. When I was said seven to seven, chapter 7 and 6 in reverse order, if you reverse 76. Then you'll be cringed if you look that up on social media. Yeah. So I'm trying to avoid that. I don't know if it's a good idea to avoid that, but it's best to avoid that so that I'm not commonly known for that. Anyways, yeah, I'll see you probably tomorrow, probably after tomorrow, but maybe I'll take a break, maybe not. It depends on how the day will go. Anyways, sayonara! Kaboosh!